The Congress of South African Trade Unions has spoken against what it says is divisive and destructive rhetoric, which continues to fuel racial tensions. The Trade Union Federation says the country needs to unite ahead of the African Growth and Opportunities Act contract renewal with the United States. COSATU's plea comes days after the United States House Foreign Affairs Committee passed a bill that seeks to sanction some ANC leaders. Parliamentary Coordinator Matthew Parks joins me now live. Mr. Parks, thank you for your time and for joining us this evening. So AGOA is up for renewal. How does COSATU view the importance of AGOA for South African workers as well as industries?
Good evening. Thanks for having us. So our mandate as COSATU is to look after the interests of workers, to look after the jobs, to see how do we protect and save jobs, how do we create new jobs. The Africa Growth and Opportunities Act, which has been a framework for African countries, about 35 African countries, to export goods to the United States, the world's largest economy, tariff-free. And that has benefited many African countries, but also has benefited South Africa quite significantly. So many of our mining, our agricultural, our motor manufacturing and other manufacturing sectors like clothing and textiles, jewelry and chemicals and so forth, those sectors have benefited from access to the US through AGOA. We have also seen it helping improve trade and investment both ways between the US and South Africa. We have about 600 US companies invested in South Africa. We have about 500,000 South African workers linked to trade with the US. And there's also significant South African investments in the US as well. It's also had an unintended positive benefit towards African economic integration. So South Africa exports thousands of cars to the US every year, but the steering racks for those cars come from Tunisia. The rubber for the tires comes from Cote d'Ivoire. We've seen the wire harnessing from Botswana, including those cars. And even the car seats coming from Lesotho. So that's been an unintended benefit as well, to help integrate African development, to also help create jobs in neighboring states too, because we can't sustain a flood of migration to South Africa from the rest of the continent. So we've supported it, and not saying it's perfect, no trade agreement is perfect, but we've supported it, and we think it's critical that the US Congress, who will make this decision, does consider extending it. It expires at the end of September. So we've always had quite a few engagements as COSATU with colleagues in the US Congress, US government. We've enjoyed the support of our trade unions system movement in the US as well in this journey. And so we're hopeful it can be returned. It also can help address many of the trade instabilities we've seen right now between the US and South Africa and the rest of the continent. It's not perfect, but we think number one is to renew it. There's quite a short time frame to do so, but we have been urged, comforted by colleagues in the US saying it can be done. And we think that can then give space for further discussion about how to enhance it, to open up doors to other African export sectors, how to give financial and logistical support for African sectors and so forth.
Right.
But I think for us, number one is to extend it currently.
I mean, you make mention of that interconnectedness of regional trade, the vehicles that we export using those steering racks from countries such as Tunisia. You also talk as an organization about the divisive rhetoric. How can a unified messaging among civil society, labor, as well as government just strengthen South Africa's case for the AGOA renewal?
So we've been part as COSATU of engagement with the US over the past few years when we could first see turbulence in the relationship under the previous administration led by the former President Biden. We had worked closely with the sixth administration, in particular the former Minister of Trade and Industry, Ibrahim Patel. We worked closely with the presidency led by President Ramaphosa, with the Department of International Relations, but also with our colleagues in organized business as well, because fundamentally, we need to see South Africa's economy grow. We can't sit at 1% per annum. We need to see jobs not only being saved, but being created when you have a 43% unemployment rate. So for us, we've worked close with our own government and our colleagues in business in this journey because it benefits all of us. The US is our second largest trading partner. We think we actually need to increase trade, not only with the US, but also other major industrial centers of the world, like the European Union, like China, like Japan, India, Korea, also in particular the African continent. We think AGOA can actually help play a positive role in supporting the African free trade continental area. But we must say, and look, South Africa is a constitutional democracy, which is something that COSATU and our alliance partners, the ANC, the SCCP, many others fought for. It's a robust democracy. The judiciary holds the state accountable. The electorate holds the executive accountable in elections and so forth. Parliament too plays its role. And that's fine, but we think it's not helpful, it's not patriotic, it's actually quite destructive to see a flurry of apartheid nostalgists running to the US to decampaign South Africa, to spread fake news about white persecution, white genocide, to spread fake news about South Africa falling apart and so forth. And that doesn't help, because what it does, it sends a message to the US that we are a country that should be written off, that deters investors, and all South Africans will pay the price. It will not only be an ANC-led government who some of these apartheid apologists may despise, but it'll be Afrikaners who are farmers. It'll be Afrikaners who are workers in the motor manufacturing sector. It'll be all South Africans if we see trade declining or if we see South Africa exiting AGOA. And there is space in South Africa for people to make the voices heard. We have elections. That's why people must be partisan. We have a constitutional court or any other court if you are aggrieved by anything. There's parliament, which has robust and constitutionally required public participation. So these are the venues we exploit as COSATU all the time. But we recognize when you go outside of South Africa, you must defend the nation. You will be honest and frank. Sure, you don't need to lie, obviously. But we can't be supporting people who spread fake news when there's no such thing as white genocide in South Africa, for example. And that really does damage to our country. And we think some of those people like AfriForum, some the Freedom Front Plus, who was recently there, Sakalicha, etc., really need to kind of grow up a little bit and for once move out of the narrow racial, tribalistic, ethnic kraals and actually embrace the concept of being a South African, embrace the spirit of non-racialism, and accept that apartheid is gone and is not going back. We have many problems, but we need to collectively work to address them. But spouting a polite form of racism is not acceptable, to be honest.
And we've seen just some of the repercussions of that rhetoric. I mean, not only has the United States House of Foreign Affairs now passed that bill to see some of those ANC leaders sanctioned, but the US, of course, has recently imposed that 30% tariff on all South African goods starting from the 1st of August. How do you see this playing a part in the USA's decision regarding AGOA? And what strategies do you think COSATU is advocating for to mitigate that impact, especially that will have on workers and local industries?
So it makes our job as a country all the more difficult. We can't expect people in the US Congress to be expert on any country. There's nearly 200 countries in the world. We are a medium-sized country. But when you have people, white South Africans, running to the US, spreading fake news, it does damage. There is a real consequence. And we also think it's not helpful when the president, we've all asked the president, Cyril Ramaphosa, to help put in place a reset which is mutually beneficial, which respects both countries' sovereignty and respects South Africa's transformation journey. When he puts that in place, he goes to the White House, meets with his counterpart, Donald Trump. And then you have this unpatriotic brigade constantly going to the US spreading fake news. It doesn't help us at all. And they need to reflect more humbly and more respectfully what they've done. We've worked closely with organized business, for example, in stabilized relationship with the US over the last few years. That's what patriots must do. All countries have been faced with this US tariff. If the US tariffs at 30% were to be imposed upon South Africa, that'll have a devastating impact upon agriculture, upon motor manufacturing. There's no company which could afford to do that. So we are hopeful. We are working close with the presidency, with DERCO, with DTIC, to try to put in place this reset. We have seen some progress in the past few months, in the past few years as well. But at the same time, also, we shouldn't rely upon one economy because that does make you vulnerable. We should be exploring how to open up other markets for South African goods. And we've seen progress on that front. We've seen some of the motor manufacturing sectors increasing exports of cars to Europe. BMW recently announced they're going to export about 79,000 cars to Canada. We've seen government opening up agricultural export opportunities in the Philippines, in Thailand. Those are the kinds of things which we must do. Of course, we must also aggressively prioritize investments in the region of Southern Africa and the entire African continent, in Latin America and so forth. And of course, naturally, we must also get our own house in order as well. We need to make sure we have reliable and affordable electricity so industry can take off. We need to make sure that transit is moving so that mining, manufacturing, agricultural sectors can take off. We must fix local governments to have access to basic services so SMEs can work. And also have, a much more aggressive economic stimulus package to grow the economy. So all of this must be done, but it doesn't help when you have this small, noisy, fringe lunatic groupings constantly undermining the country. I'm not saying there must be propagandists for the ANC. No, of course not. This is a democracy. They have right to dissenting views, but there's a place and a space to do so, and there's a manner in which to do so. And going overseas is not a way to do so. We think it actually is quite harmful, in particular to Afrikaans communities. And we do appreciate that these fringe groups in the AfriForum don't represent the majority of Afrikaners. We've seen many patriotic Afrikaners actually distancing themselves, whether it's Agri-SA, whether it's other parts of the business community or other members of parliament and so forth. But we do think there is a need to rein in the fake news brigade of AfriForum and there's other fringe lunatics. And really, for once, they should embrace a spirit of non-racialism in South Africa.
And we also just can't ignore that the USA could also be taking advantage with regards to championing their agenda and their dissatisfaction with South Africa's alignments with other countries. I mean, considering South Africa's growing relationships with China and Russia, how does COSATU then view South Africa's balancing of its international relations with major global players such as China and Russia and the USA in the context of trade agreements?
So we support government led by the ANC stance on foreign policy. South Africa is a non-aligned state. We openly embrace the African agenda, and that is a correct stance. And we need to have good relationships with all countries in the world, whether it's the US on the one side, whether it's China on the other side, whether it's the European Union or Russia, whether it's Brazil or India. There will always be contradictions in bilateral relations. There's even contradictions, for example, between ourselves and Brazil around poultry, around sugar, and so forth. But you have to find ways to address those concerns. There's been a time of difficulties in our relationship around trade with China, with imported goods coming in and threatening local industries. But then government has been able to engage with the Chinese government to say, can you reduce the amount because of our need to protect our local industries? There will be disagreements even with other countries, whether it's in Africa, whether it's in Russia. So you need to find a way to manage it. Loud-held diplomacy doesn't help us. And again, it does not help when you have some South Africans going to these countries to stoke tensions, to stoke fake news. It makes it very difficult. We're not saying government is perfect. I think everybody would know that COSATU is amongst the first to always give government a kick in the shins when we think is messed up. But we are constructive as well. And when government does well, we must also applaud it and encourage it to continue on that path. And equally, we must come with constructive and sober proposals when we disagree with government and say, here's alternatives which make better sense than what you're doing. So that is the approach we've always done as COSATU, but we agree with government. At times, government will make mistakes. That is the nature of humanity. At times, there will be things it can't figure out, but it shows the ability to self-correct. And I think that's what government has been doing, and we think they've done quite well under very difficult circumstances. Even, for example, the president's response to the US Congress's Foreign Affairs Committee's resolution, which has yet to be adopted by the broader Congress, and there's still a journey around that bill around sanctioning ANC leaders. That is, I think the president showed admirable constraint to say, we will engage. When former Ambassador Ibrahim Rasool was unfortunately expelled from the US, government showed a very mature and calming response to say, we note, we regret, we're focusing on a reset. So I think that shows you the sophistication of South African society, that we will not get distracted by the normal turbulence of life. We'll focus on the strategic goals, which is linked to economic growth, which is linked to trade and investment, which is linked to job creation, and also protecting South Africa's sovereignty and also protecting our transformation journey, which is constitutionally mandated, whether or not AfriForum have read the Constitution, but we will continue on that path.
All right, Mr. Parks, thank you so much for your time. And we certainly are looking forward to that renewal, especially in the best interest of workers across the country. Thank you so much.